news. The Republican Party's war on democracy continues, and it's now looking for help from the 5 hardcore right-wingers on the Supreme Court. Last week, the nation's top court agreed to hear the case of Evanwell v. Abbott. The case, which comes out of Texas, is deceptively simple. At issue is the basic question of how congressional districts are measured. Under current law, districts are drawn according to their total population. Plaintiffs in the case of Evanwell v. Abbott, however, want to change all that. They're asking the Supreme Court to overturn decades of precedent and rule that districts should not be drawn according to their total population, but instead according to some other standard, like total citizens or eligible voters, or maybe even registered voters. On a surface level, their argument appears to make a certain amount of sense, but when you dig a bit deeper, it's clear that it's just another attempt on the part of Republicans to disenfranchise minorities and gerrymander themselves into a permanent majority in Congress. With me now to help explain why and how is Katherine Culliton-González, Senior Attorney and Director of Voter Protection at the Advancement Project. Katherine, welcome back.
Thanks.
It's great to see you again.
Thanks, great to be here.
And I think I got your name right this time.
You did.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, can you explain this to us?
Sure. So the Supreme Court has been a lot more active in voting rights cases, and it decided to take up this case and take a look at it. It's rejected some cases recently, like our voter ID litigation in Wisconsin, but it's taken up more cases that have to do with what you call gerrymandering or what we call vote dilution. So
right.
Cases that have to do with race in voting and the racial makeup of different districts and whether or not people of color have the chance to represent themselves. So this case is just kind of all over the map. You described it really well. So we have, conservative groups saying that things like citizenship and voter registration and other measures should be used instead of the constitutional principle of one person, one vote. And on our side, the one person, one vote principle is really helpful, but it's more complicated than that too. We want to make sure people have the ability to elect candidates of choice without discrimination. So it's hard to predict how this is going to come out. And
right. On the one hand, an elected representative makes decisions that affect literally everyone in their district.
Right.
So theoretically, everyone in their district should be counted in terms of defining who's going to represent them and how and all that kind of thing. Some arguments have been made, though, that some of those people, the census doesn't actually check citizenship.
Right.
This is all the consequence of the census every 10 years, right? This is in the Constitution.
The decennial census doesn't check citizenship, but there is something called the American Community Survey, which is, very underfunded, that checks citizenship and, many other details that the decennial census that's taken every 10 years does. So that data is accessible.
So that data is available. Mm-hmm. Secondly, what about children? Do we count children as persons right now toward congressional representation, even though they can't vote? Are they trying to eliminate them? And then third, if they go with registered voters as opposed to eligible voters, tell me if it seems like they might be wanting to do so. But if so, then young people and college students, for example, who have not yet registered to vote, right. Older people who can't. In many states register to vote because they no longer drive and they don't have ID, disabled people who can't get out and get the ID, all those people would no longer even be counted toward representation. Do I understand that correctly? What am I missing here?
No, I think you understand it perfectly. So that's what the plaintiffs want, right? And there are, conservative groups that have been litigating other voting rights cases and sort of pushing it up to the Supreme Court to see what they can get out of it. And, like I said, on our side, Advancement Project, we're a racial justice group, and we're concerned about equality of representation for everyone, and particularly people of color. And so I think for the issue of children, it's very important that children are counted. Children need to count on their elected representatives to get what they need in terms of schools. Unless you don't believe in public schools at all, you want to make sure that children are counted.
Well, by and large, Republicans don't. I mean, they want charter schools.
Yeah, I'm not really sure how that's going to play out in this, but I was curious to see that the plaintiffs are asking for actual voters to be the measure.
Right.
And so children do not vote, but, I as a mother vote for my children, and I would like them to be counted in the census. Right. We have 3 kids.
And also, and the one big group that I missed in my list is urban dwellers, people who live in cities.
Right.
I mean, I live here in Washington, D.C. I have for 5 years. I don't own a car. If I didn't you know, I maintain my driver's license because of many of the things that I do, but not everybody does. You know, not everybody flies, you know, for example, or whatever. There's a lot of people who are, particularly the urban poor, who don't have the ID that's necessary to vote or who are not registered voters. So they get blown away too, right?
Well, if the plaintiffs have it their way, yeah, that would only be registered voters, as you say, and people with residence. So, you know, actual voters is what they're asking for. And you make a very good point. So only 90% of the electorate, you know, have an ID when you look at these strict ID laws. So they're people that, you know, are left out of the count, or people who move more frequently. So it depends on, you know, how you count one person, one vote. And the ways that we're talking about would disproportionately affect, you know, Black and Latino voters. Not the ID or the residency issues. Generally, that would disproportionately affect Black and Latino voters. Another side, though, that comes into this case is prison gerrymandering. So urban areas like New York City have, because of the racial injustices in our criminal justice system, or Baltimore, you know, people of color are much more targeted, and they're sent off to a prison that's not within their district. And so that's not something that's really helpful either. And we believe they should be counted, you know, in their district of their residency. And so it's a very complicated case, and it's going to be, now, you know, just incredible how the court will decide it.
Yeah. One of the, quote, conservative arguments I've heard is that because the census basically just says, you know, who are you, what's your name, where do you, or whatever. They don't say, are you a citizen? That according to the conservatives, there's large numbers of people who are being counted, particularly in the American Southwest, who are undocumented people. I mean, you know, the right-wingers refer to them as illegals. And that this is just an attempt to flush that out of the system and make sure that we're only looking at Americans. Is there any sense to that argument?
That argument actually cuts both ways. So I think, you know, counting only actual registered voters is going to leave out a lot of people who are immigrants. And our immigration system is clearly broken. In the last 10 years, it's, you know, and the last 20 years, it's excluded more and more people of color from becoming citizens. And on the other hand, we have, you know, we have millions of people in the United States who are legal permanent residents who could become citizens. So, and then I want to tell you that the argument cuts both ways in the sense that if you're looking at fairness in districts or not discriminating under the Voting Rights Act in these districts, you want to make sure that there's an ability to elect the candidates of choice. So also in the American Southwest, MALDEF and the Department of Justice or in California have brought cases saying, you know, you really should take into account citizenship, because if you're only going to count, you know, by people, there are many people in the Latino population and in the Asian Pacific Islander population that can't vote these days. So I would argue for an ability to elect standard to be adopted, and so one person, one vote be defined also by the parameters of the Voting Rights Act and the 14th and 15th Amendment that prohibit racial discrimination in voting. But that doesn't mean I agree with the plaintiffs in the way that they view the citizenship issue.
Yeah, this is going to be fascinating, and just absolutely fascinating. Katherine, thanks so much for dropping by tonight.
Thanks for having me. Thanks.